I remember the morning she walked into my courtroom as if it were a runway. Emma Richardson, 20 years old, perfectly put together, chin high, sunglasses still on even though we were indoors. She didn't carry the air of someone facing the law. She carried the air of someone attending a photo shoot. When the double doors closed behind her, the sound was soft, but it carried weight. You could feel the atmosphere change. People shifted in their seats. It wasn't just her presence, it was the confidence, the entitlement, the assumption that this, like everything else in her life, would bend for her. I glanced down at the docket. Emma Richardson, I said, reading aloud, 3 citations, speeding, illegal parking in a disabled zone, and refusing to cooperate with a police officer. I looked up at her. She crossed one leg over the other, her designer bag catching the light. Her body language said everything. This isn't serious. I'm just waiting for the formality to be over. She looked directly at me and said, that officer didn't know who he was talking to. There was a chill in her tone, the kind of practiced arrogance that often comes from being told your whole life that you're special. I asked her, and who exactly are you, Miss Richardson? She smiled, a camera-ready smile. I'm the daughter of Senator Richardson. I thought you'd recognize the name. A quiet murmur passed through the courtroom. Even the clerk looked up from her notes. It's strange how quickly the energy in a room changes when a famous name is spoken. I nodded slowly. I recognize it, I said. But here, you're not your father's name. Here, citizen of this city. And right now, that citizen is in violation of the law. Her smile faltered for just a second, then hardened. Fine, she said. Just tell me how much. I'll have my assistant send payment. It was a moment I've seen many times before. When someone mistakes justice for a transaction, I told her calmly but firmly, this isn't a restaurant, Miss Richardson. You don't pay and leave. You listen and learn. Someone in the back chuckled quietly. Emma turned toward the sound, her expression sharp. You think this funny? My father, I cut her off gently but clearly, isn't the one sitting in that chair. She exhaled through her nose, half scoffing, half trying to reassert her control. So this is how small-town justice works, she said. Her bodyguard shifted beside her, a silent shadow in the center. Then I noticed a small red light blinking on the bench next to her bag. Her phone was recording. Turn that off, I said. She leaned back, folding her arms. Transparency is a cornerstone of democracy, isn't it? Unless you have something to hide. There was a ripple of discomfort in the courtroom. I could sense the tension building, the young woman testing boundaries, the audience wondering how far I'd let her go. I've learned over many years that raising your voice in those moments only feeds defiance. So I kept mine even. You confuse transparency with performance, I told her. You can't live stream accountability. That line hung in the air. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her expression. Uncertainty. Just for a heartbeat, she looked less sure of herself. Miss Richardson, I said quietly, I've seen people come through these doors for decades. The desperate, the broken, the proud, but never someone so terrified of being ordinary. Her confidence cracked, not visibly to everyone, but I saw it. The way her shoulders stiffened, the brief tightening around her jaw. I could tell she wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Not by anyone, and certainly not by someone who wasn't trying to impress her. I folded my hands and looked at her. And so, I said, you stand here as the senator's daughter, or as Emma Richardson, citizen of this court? She lifted her chin, defiance returning like armor. I'm not afraid of cameras, she said. I leaned forward slightly. That's why I won't call them. The silence that followed was heavy. One of those silences that hums, that fills every inch of the room. Even her bodyguard shifted uneasily. When I spoke again, my voice was softer. You came here to prove that your name can't be touched, I said, but you'll leave understanding that name's fade. Character doesn't. I saw the words land. It wasn't anger that crossed her face next. It was confusion. Maybe for the first time, someone wasn't reacting to her wealth or her power. I wasn't impressed, intimidated, or interested in her last name. I was interested in her as a human being standing before the law like everyone else. That's something people often misunderstand about the courtroom. It isn't a stage, and it isn't a battlefield. It's a mirror. Some people walk in ready to see themselves. Others, like Emma, spend their first few minutes pretending the reflection isn't theirs. But the truth always finds a way to show itself. As the gavel came down to adjourn for the morning, I looked at her one last time. Behind the designer glasses, the practiced posture, and the polished arrogance, I saw what I've seen in so many others who believe they're untouchable. Fear. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be just another case about a traffic violation. It was going to be about something deeper. It was going to be about the difference between power and worth. When Emma returned to my courtroom that afternoon, I could sense she hadn't learned anything yet. Her confidence was still intact, but it had changed. Less of a performance, more of a defense mechanism. It's something I've seen countless times. Pride clinging harder when truth begins to scrape at the edges. I started simply. Miss Richardson, I said, tell me about yourself. She blinked, surprised by the question. About me? Yes, not your last name, not your father's position, you. She hesitated, clearly not used to being asked something that personal in a setting she expected to control. I'm 20. She finally said, I studied communications at Brown. I interned last summer for a campaign. Your father's, I asked. She smirked, of course. The way she said it carried layers. Expectation, pride, but also something hollow. And what does your mother do? She lectures at Harvard, she said quickly. Comedians. There was irony there, though I didn't point it out. So both your parents are very busy, I said. She shrugged. They do important work. And where do you fit in that work? Emma's answer came easily, almost rehearsed. I represent the family. I keep my image clean, stay visible when I need to be, invisible when I don't. My parents call me their asset. She smiled faintly when she said it, but I could tell it didn't feel like a compliment. Do you live with them? I asked. She gave a dry laugh. If you can call seeing them over FaceTime living with them, then yes. Her tone was sharp, but her eyes flickered. Something tired in them, something she was trying to hide behind sarcasm. My father's in Washington most weeks, she continued. And my mother travels between Cambridge and D.C. What did you call it earlier? Citizens? We're a photo family. Perfect smiles, perfect timing, perfect distance. I nodded slowly, letting the silence sit. It's in those quiet moments that people often reveal more than they intend. And where do you fit into that picture? I asked again, softer this time. Her lips twitched upward, but there was no real humor there. Hey, wherever the press needs me to stand. I didn't respond right away. Sometimes silence is the most powerful gavel. When she looked back up, her confidence had dimmed slightly. What do you do for yourself, Miss Richardson? I finally asked. She frowned. What do you mean? I mean something not for your father's image, not for headlines or followers, something for you. Her jaw tightened. I don't have that luxury, she said. Everything I do has to reflect well on the family. I leaned back in my chair. That isn't luxury, Miss Richardson. That's servitude. Her laugh was brittle. To save the psychoanalysis, Judge. I'm not here for therapy. Just tell me the fine. I didn't look away. Instead, I reached for the folder on my desk. This isn't about a fine, I said. You refused to show your license, insult an officer, and you laughed when he warned you about your conduct. She crossed her arms. He was rude. He didn't recognize who I was. I looked her in the eye. And that offended you? Yes, she snapped. He acted like I was just some random person. There it was, the confession. The quiet belief that a hierarchy should exist even in justice. Miss Richardson, I said, in this courtroom everyone is some random person. That's the beauty of it. She rolled her eyes. My father will handle this. He handles everything, even your pension, probably. A few gasps echoed through the courtroom. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply closed the folder. The context, Miss Richardson, is your life, I said, and it's painting a far clearer picture than any statement could. Her phone lying on the bench beside her vibrated. She glanced at it. A text flashed briefly on the screen. Dad, I'm in a meeting. Don't cause problems. She turned it face down, but not quickly enough, I noticed. Does your father know you're here? I asked. She hesitated. He said not to worry, that he'd make a few calls. I nodded slowly. Then perhaps this will be the first time someone doesn't answer to him. The room went quiet again. I could feel the shift, the fragile moment when someone realizes the rules they've always relied on don't apply here. Tell me something, I said after a pause. When you refused to cooperate with the officer, what were you trying to prove? And that he couldn't talk to me like that, she said quickly. And how exactly did he talk to you? She opened her mouth and stopped. She frowned. Excuse me? It sounds like believing harm only counts when there's blood. It sounds like thinking inconvenience is injustice. She stared at me, mouth slightly open, unsure how to respond. I leaned forward. And you think power protects you. But it's the heaviest cage a person can build. You've been living in it so long, you've mistaken its walls for safety. Her voice came quieter now. You really think I'm that lost? I looked at her, really looked. Beneath the arrogance, there was exhaustion. The kind that comes from pretending for too long. I said, you've been taught to win so well that you've forgotten what it means to be right. The words didn't land loudly, but they landed deeply. I could see it in her eyes, the smallest flinch of recognition. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The courtroom was silent except for the faint buzz of the ceiling light. Finally, she crossed her arms again. But it looked different this time. Not defense, not defiance, just an attempt to hold herself together. Well, I don't need lessons on morality, Judge, she said quietly. Just a ruling. I closed the file gently. The ruling will come, I said, but not from me. Not yet. Today, I want you to see what happens when a name stops shielding a person. She exhaled through clenched teeth. You can't intimidate me. I'm not trying to, I told her. I'm inviting you to step outside the shadow of your last name. You might be surprised how much lighter it feels. And, for the first time since she entered my courtroom, she didn't have an answer. Only silence. The kind of silence that feels like the start of something breaking and something new trying to take its place. I asked quietly. He passed away when I was 15. Heart attack. He used to come to my school plays. After he died, my parents stopped coming. They said they were too busy. I guess I've been on stage ever since. I took a slow breath. You know, Miss Richardson, I've learned that life will always put us on a stage. The only difference is whether we're performing for applause or for truth. She nodded, her jaw tightening as she fought emotion. You make it sound simple. It's not, I said. But it's worth it for a moment. The courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt like a quiet place where two people were just trying to understand each other. The clerk stopped writing. Even the security guard near the door seemed to ease his stance. And then, there was something peaceful in the honesty of that silence. Emma finally spoke again. You're not what I expected, she said. When I heard your name, I thought you'd just be another man in a robe trying to prove something. And what do you think now? I asked. She smiled faintly. I think you actually care. I chuckled softly. I care because I've seen too many young people walk in here thinking the world owes them something. But I've also seen what happens when they realize they can earn something better. She nodded, her expression more thoughtful now. Also, what happens next? What happens next? I said. It depends on whether you want to walk out of here unchanged or walk out as Emma. Person, not the persona. She looked down for a long time before answering. I want to try, she said quietly. And we have progress, I told her. And progress is the hardest verdict to win. As the session came to a close, I watched her stand up. She didn't rush out this time. She turned back, almost hesitant. Thank you, Judge, she said softly. I gave a small nod. You're welcome, Miss Richardson. Just remember, justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding. And you're starting to understand. She smiled, a real smile this time. Smaller, humbler, but genuine. And as she left the courtroom, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, she was finally beginning to see what all her privilege had hidden from her. That the truest kind of power doesn't come from a name, but from the courage to face yourself without it. The next hearing was set a week later. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Usually there's a low hum, people whispering, shuffling papers, an occasional nervous cough. But that day it was quiet, almost reverent. Emma Richardson was already there, sitting alone at the defendant's table. No entourage, no designer bag, no phone. She was early. That alone told me something had changed. She looked different, too. The confidence was still there, but it had softened into composure. Her hair was tied back, her outfit simple and neat. She looked less like the daughter of a senator and more like a young woman trying to rebuild herself piece by piece. When I took my seat, she stood up respectfully. Good morning, Your Honor, she said. Good morning, Miss Richardson. I replied. How are you feeling today? She took a small breath. Better? A little embarrassed still. That's not always a bad thing, I said. Embarrassment is the doorway to awareness. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Even Emma smiled. I looked down at her case file again, but this time I wasn't looking at the violations. I was looking at the story between the lines. The officer's notes, her previous defiance, her recent cooperation. It painted a picture, and that picture had started to change. Miss Richardson, I began, but before we continue, I want you to tell me in your own words what happened that day. She nodded, folding her hands neatly in front of her. I was late for a meeting, she said, and to listen, for once in her life, really listen. The room was silent after that. No one moved. No one coughed. Even the hum of the lights seemed quieter. I could have ended the session right there, but something in me wanted her to know what I saw. And Miss Richardson, I said softly, that's not just an answer. That's growth. And I hope you hold on to it because redemption doesn't come from punishment. It comes from transformation. Her lips trembled slightly, but she stood a little taller. Oh, thank you, Your Honor, she said. As she left the courtroom, I watched her walk with a different kind of confidence. Not the rehearsed kind that comes from power, but the quiet, grounded kind that comes from self-awareness. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look like she was performing. She looked free. And as the doors closed behind her, I realized something that day. Sometimes justice isn't about the verdict at all. It's about giving someone the chance to finally meet the person they were meant to become. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, filled only with the soft hum of ceiling fans and the faint shuffle of papers. The world outside carried on. Cars passing, voices echoing from the street. But inside those four walls, time seemed to slow. Judge Caprio sat at the bench reviewing the file that had become far more than a case folder. It was the record of a transformation, unexpected, reluctant, but real. The door creaked open. Emma Richardson stepped inside. This time there was no trace of the senator's daughter who once entered as though the courtroom were a stage. No bodyguard, no polished attitude, no sunglasses concealing her expression. She wore a plain gray sweater, her hair loosely tied back, and carried something in her hands, a small canvas painting, edges worn, the colors faintly smudged. Sit down, Miss Richardson, Caprio said without looking up. His tone wasn't stern, just steady. Yes, Your Honor, she replied, her voice quiet but sure. After a pause, he lifted his gaze. I dismissed your father's letter this morning, he said. He wanted this handled privately. She gave a short, humorless laugh. He always does. Caprio folded his hands. When was the last time you really spoke to him? I don't mean scheduling or appearances. I mean a real conversation. Her eyes flickered downward. He doesn't like those, she murmured. He calls them distractions. Says emotion clouds judgment. And what does he talk about then? Campaigns. Optics. Donations. Every word is a strategy. And where do you fit into that strategy? She hesitated, the answer catching in her throat. I'm the proof, she said finally. The success story that makes him look human. Caprio studied her for a moment, his eyes kind but unwavering. You sound tired of being proof. She exhaled slowly. I'm tired of being invisible in my own life. The judge leaned back in his chair. That's the first honest sentence you've said in this courtroom. Miss Richardson. Her voice wavered. Her voice wavered. I don't know how else to be anymore. I've spent years being told who to act like, what to say, what to wear. I don't even know who I am when no one's watching. That, Caprio said softly, is where you start. By admitting you've been performing. Before she could respond, a knock interrupted them. The bailiff stepped in and handed the judge a sealed envelope. Caprio opened it, scanned the letter, and sighed. It's from your father, he said. He's withdrawn his earlier apology. He claims you were provoked by the woman in the parking lot. Emma's face went pale. What? He's blaming a mother in a wheelchair for your choices, Caprio said quietly. Even now, he's trying to protect your image instead of your integrity. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. He doesn't mean to hurt me, she said weakly. He just doesn't know how else to live. Neither do you, the judge replied gently. But you're learning, she nodded, taking a trembling breath. Yesterday after he left, I went back to see Mrs. Bennett. Caprio's brow lifted slightly. You did? Yes, she said. I asked her how she manages to stay calm when life keeps being unfair. And what did she say? Emma smiled faintly. She said, because anger is heavy and my son's chair already weighs enough. The courtroom fell silent again, the words hanging like soft light in the air. Caprio's voice was low, almost reverent. She held out a small silver pin in the shape of a heart. She said to wear it when I start to forget that people matter more than image. Caprio nodded, visibly moved. A reminder born from Grace. She didn't even want my apology. Emma said, her voice quiet but steady. She told me she hoped I'd grow into someone who could apologize without being told to. The judge smiled faintly. And Miss Richardson, I'm ready to give my decision. But before I do, I want you to understand what I'm about to say isn't about punishment. It's about direction. Emma straightened. I'm listening. He'll pay your fine, he began. But that's the smallest part of it. Tomorrow morning, you'll join me at the Haven Community Center. You'll spend 1 week helping the children there. No press, no cameras, no excuses. You'll give your time, not your money. She blinked, surprised. You're serious? Deadly, he said with a faint smile. Her lips trembled, half fear, half relief. And after that, he looked directly at her. After that, you'll decide who you want to be. Because for the first time, no one else will decide it for you. The next morning, the sky was a dull blue-gray, the kind that makes the air feel heavy with possibility. Caprio's car pulled up in front of a small brick building with a faded sign. Haven Community Center. Beside him, Emma sat quietly, hands clasped in her. This isn't part of your sentence, he said as they stepped out. This is part of your education. Inside, the scent of crayons and disinfectant filled the halls. Laughter echoed faintly from the next room. Mrs. Bennett was there, bent over a wheelchair, helping a young boy adjust his straps. When she looked up and saw Emma, her face was unreadable, but she didn't turn away. Hello again, Emma said softly. Mrs. Bennett nodded. You came. I said I would. Then come help, the woman replied. We're painting today. It's messy work. Emma took off her coat and rolled up her... For the first few minutes, she didn't speak. She passed brushes, wiped tables, fetched water. The children didn't care who she was. They just saw another adult willing to hold paint cups and laugh when things spilled. The small boy splattered blue paint across her sweater and giggled. Emma laughed too. It wasn't forced. It was real, unguarded. Hours passed unnoticed. When Mrs. Bennett approached, she handed Emma a small canvas. On it, a child had drawn 2 stick figures, one tall with yellow hair, one smaller in a wheelchair. Above it, written in uneven letters, Thank you, Miss. Emma stared at it for a long time. Her throat tightened. Who drew this? The boy raised his hand shyly. Me. She knelt beside him. Why? He shrugged. Because you look sad. Something inside her broke open then. Not in pain, but in release. She hugged the boy gently, whispering, Thank you. When they left the center that afternoon, the sun was dipping low, spilling gold through the clouds. Emma carried the little painting under her arm. So, Miss Richardson, Caprio said as they reached the car, what did you learn today? She smiled softly. That grace is louder than power, and harder to earn. He nodded. That's a lesson most people never buy, no matter how much money they have. She turned to him. But do you think my father will ever understand? Caprio sighed. Maybe not, but even if he doesn't, you will. And that's enough. They drove back in silence, the painting resting between them like a fragile truth. A week later, the case was officially closed. Emma stood in the same courtroom where it had all begun, but this time she wasn't there as the senator's daughter. She stood as herself. Your Honor, she said. I want to pay my fine myself. You already did, Caprio said with a smile. She hesitated. Then let me say something instead. He nodded, annotates. I used to think rules were for people without connections, he said. That empathy was weakness. But I was wrong. The real weakness is needing everyone to fear you because no one loves you. The courtroom was still. Even the stenographer stopped typing. You once told me accountability is a kind of freedom, she continued. I didn't believe you then, but now I do. Caprio leaned forward, warmth in his voice. Then let me say something no one else has told you yet, Miss Richardson. I'm proud of you. For the first time, she didn't look away. Thank you, Your Honor. As she turned to leave, she held the door open for an elderly woman entering. A small act unnoticed by most, but not by Caprio. And as the narrator's voice might have said, she came to court believing her name would protect her. But she left knowing something far more powerful, that identity isn't inherited, it's earned. And that morning in a quiet Rhode Island courtroom, justice didn't just close a case. It opened a heart.